At 11:47 p.m., his Apple Watch lit up with a message he was never supposed to see. One text. One notification. And in that second, he found out his wife had been lying to his face for months. He didn't yell. He didn't confront her. He didn't even move. He just stared at the screen, read the message twice, and realized something worse than the cheating itself: she had no idea he knew. So instead of blowing up his marriage that night, he did something colder. He saved the proof. He stayed quiet. And for the next few years, he waited. Until the exact moment her life would come apart in front of everyone. The message was simple, but it changed everything. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an apology. It was proof. Proof that while he was at home trusting his wife, she was building a second life right behind his back. Proof that the late nights, the excuses, the sudden distance, none of it was random. He had been getting played for months. The exact words on his screen told him everything he needed to know. And he read them twice, not because he didn't understand, but because he wanted to make sure he felt it completely before he decided what to do with it. Because what he did next would define everything. But the part that really hit him wasn't even the cheating. It was the calmness of it all. How normal she acted. How she smiled at him, talked about the future, and looked him in the eye like nothing was wrong. Most men would have exploded right there. Most men would have confronted her, argued, begged for the truth, and probably ruined their own case in the process. But he didn't. He did the opposite. He kept the message. He took screenshots. He started paying attention to every pattern, every lie, every gap in her story. And once he saw the full picture, he realized something even worse. She wasn't just cheating. She was getting careless. That's when the real story began. Not the cheating. The waiting. Because while she thought she was hiding everything, he was quietly building the one thing she could never fight back against: undeniable proof. And I want to stop here for just a moment. Because I need to ask you something directly. What would you do if it were you? You've just found out. You're holding the proof. The person sleeping 10 feet away from you has no idea what you're looking at. Would you confront them right then? Would you walk out the door? Or would you do what he did, and go quiet? Because most people react. And most people who react, lose. He understood something that most people only learn after it's too late. In a divorce, the person who moves first with emotion, loses. The person who moves first with documentation, wins. So he made a decision that night that changed everything about how this story ends. He stopped being a husband. And he started being a strategist. Now, this is where the story gets darker. Because 2 years into his preparation, just as he began quietly consulting attorneys and moving financial pieces into position, she made a move he never saw coming. She filed for a restraining order. Not because she was afraid. Not because there had been any threat. But because she had gotten to a lawyer first. And that lawyer told her the fastest way to gain control of the marital home was to get him removed from the property. And so she filed. She claimed he was dangerous. She signed a document, under oath, describing incidents that simply never happened. And for a period of time, it worked. He was given 24 hours to collect what he could and leave the home he had paid for. The home he had maintained. The home where his name was on the mortgage. Gone. Just like that. Based on a piece of paper. And this is the part of this story I need you to sit with. Because it doesn't matter how carefully you've planned. If the other side gets to a courthouse first with a fabricated document, you can lose your home before you ever see a judge. The system is designed to protect, but a false filing can weaponize that protection against the very person who deserves it. He was now the accused. In his own story. And she was, at least on paper, the victim. What would you do if it were you? If the person you love tried to leave you homeless with a lie? If everything you'd quietly built suddenly felt like it was about to be buried under a false narrative that painted you as a threat? What would you do? He called his attorney. And he said 4 words: pull everything. Right now. This is where the case shifted from personal betrayal into something that looked more like corporate litigation. His attorney filed an emergency motion to contest the restraining order, and they didn't just contest it. They demolished it. Every alleged incident she had described in her filing. He had documentation that placed him somewhere else. Timestamps. Digital records. Cell data. She hadn't just lied. She had lied sloppily. The restraining order was vacated within 30 days. But here's what you need to understand, and this is the part that most people miss when they hear this story: he didn't celebrate. Because he knew something she didn't. That false filing had just handed him something more powerful: a documented lie. Under oath. In a courthouse. In family law, credibility is currency. And she had just spent hers. From this point forward, every claim she made would be measured against the fact that she had already been caught lying to a judge. And his attorney knew exactly how to spend that. Now let's talk about the financial side of this case. Because this is where he had been playing financial chess while she was playing checkers. In the months before the filing, he had begun working with a financial attorney to understand exactly what was and wasn't marital property. He wasn't hiding assets. That's illegal. But he was understanding them. There's a significant legal distinction between hiding money and correctly classifying money. Assets that were gifted to him individually. Inheritances in his name. Investment accounts opened prior to the marriage and never commingled. Under the law, those aren't marital assets. Those are separate property. And if you never mix them, they remain legally protected. He had kept meticulous records. Bank statements showing the origin of every dollar in every account. Paper trails establishing which assets predated the marriage. A financial timeline so clean that her attorney reportedly asked for a 2-week continuance just to process what they were looking at. Meanwhile, she had been spending. During the period of the affair, she had been making financial decisions that would come back with devastating effect. Joint credit cards. Charged to the limit on purchases he could prove had nothing to do with the household. A personal loan, co-signed by both. In some states, when a spouse can prove that marital funds were used to fund an extramarital relationship, it's called dissipation of marital assets. The court can hold the spending spouse accountable. And he had the receipts. Literally. By the time both sides submitted their financial disclosures to the court, the picture was stark. On his side, clearly documented separate property. Clean accounts. A business structure, established years before the marriage, that his corporate attorney had properly shielded through an LLC. On her side, debt. Specifically, her half of the dissipated assets, which the court agreed were her responsibility. The personal loan. The credit card balances tied to transactions his team had forensically connected to the affair. The attorney's fees she had accumulated. Attorney's fees from pursuing litigation strategies, like the failed restraining order, that the judge ruled were not made in good faith. In family court, the court can order the party who behaved improperly to pay the other side's legal costs. She had filed a false restraining order. She had run up joint debt. She had attempted to litigate aggressively with a strategy that lacked evidentiary support. Every one of those decisions became a line item. When the divorce was finalized, after nearly 3 years of proceedings, she was not awarded spousal support. She was not awarded the house. Because the equity he had brought into the marriage was classified as his separate property. She was not awarded a share of his business. Because his LLC had been properly structured and the marital contribution was minimal and documentable. What she was awarded was her share of the joint accounts, which by that point, after accounting for the debt she was assigned, left her with a net of approximately 0. Let that land. 3 years of an affair. 3 years of deception. A fake restraining order. High-priced attorneys. And at the end of it all, 0. Not because the system failed. But because the system worked exactly as designed, when one side comes in prepared. The final ruling came on a Tuesday morning. He sat at the plaintiff's table in a suit. Quiet. Composed. She sat across from him with 2 attorneys, one of whom had billed over $80,000 in fees. Fees she would now be responsible for paying. The judge read the ruling methodically. Line by line. Asset allocation. Debt assignment. Fee-shifting determination. The finding regarding the restraining order filing. Every line landed exactly where his team had prepared for it to land. And when the judge finished reading and asked if there were any questions from either party, he said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. This wasn't a moment of anger. It wasn't revenge. It was the end result of a strategy he had committed to on the night his Apple Watch lit up at 11:47 p.m., when most men would have shouted. He chose silence. When she moved with emotion, he moved with documentation. When she weaponized the court system, he let the record expose it. When she tried to take everything, he had already made sure there was nothing left to take that he hadn't already protected. 3 years of patience. 3 years of playing a game she didn't even know was being played. What you just watched was not a story about revenge. It was a story about preparation. About understanding that in a legal dispute, the outcome is almost never determined by who was wronged. It's determined by who documented it. By who understood the law before the law was used against them. By who stayed calm. He didn't win because he was the victim. He won because he treated every moment after 11:47 p.m. as evidence. That Apple Watch notification was the starting gun. And for the next 3 years, he ran a race that his wife didn't even know she was losing. This was a 3-year masterclass in patience. A case that went from a single notification on a wrist to a courtroom ruling that restructured an entire financial life. And what you heard today is only one layer of this story. Because the next case we're covering involves something even more complex. A forged inheritance document. A beneficiary change made 2 weeks before a death. And a family that almost lost everything. Until one person started asking the right questions. If you want to see how that case unfolded, subscribe before the full story is gone. Because some of these cases get pulled. And once they're gone, they're gone. We'll see you in the next one.